whether the sun will be shining or will it be clouds, whether it will be dry or rainy or snowy, whether it will be warm or cold, whether the winds will be high or low, from what direction the winds will come. This is all useful information for a sailor. Understanding how weather is generated and having a sense for what is coming can keep a sailor out of harm's way, or at minimum, be kept from being taken unaware. Stay until the end of this video to hear the biggest surprise I ever received from the weather while sailing. Hi, I'm Sailor Eric, and if you're interested in sailing or boat maintenance, you've come to the right channel. Weather patterns are strongly influenced by the regions in which we live. This discussion will center on weather patterns of North America, but it will be greatly applicable for the world in general. Let's start with the two fundamental components of weather, cold air and warm air. Indeed, it is always the case that when air masses of different temperatures encounter one another, the cold air swoops in underneath the warm air because warm air rises. As warm air rises, it cools while gaining altitude. The cooling is likely to cause condensation. The moisture turns from gas to liquid form, especially for warm air with higher moisture content. The faster and higher the warm air climbs, the more significant the cloud formation and unstable the ensuing weather. We generally understand that in North America, warm air is more likely to come from the south, while cooler air is more generally going to be coming from the north. We further have observed that weather systems generally move from west to east across North America. This is due to the Earth's circulation and the upper air wind patterns generated from that circulation. We've all heard of the jet stream, which can decrease flight times for flights heading to the east and increase those same flights when heading west against the jet stream. In North America, the jet stream tends to move weather patterns, unsurprisingly, from west to east. Again, we generally know that warm air rises. As that air rises, it creates a void of surface air pressure, which will attract air from higher air pressure areas. Warm air is generally characterized on weather maps as low pressure and is measured by weather stations throughout the world using isobars. Isobars are like contour lines on a map, but while contour lines on a map measure the height of land, isobars measure the air pressure across a region. If we understand that warm air is associated with low pressure, then conversely, we must believe that cold air is going to be associated with high pressure. You would be correct to guess that warmer, low pressure centers will likely attract the cool air from high pressure areas. But the air won't move in a straight line from the center of a high pressure system to the center of a low pressure system. Due to the Earth's rotation and air circulation, the air will actually circulate clockwise out of a high pressure system in the northern hemisphere toward a counterclockwise circulating low pressure area. The circulation is opposite in the southern hemisphere. This helps us understand where the wind will be coming from, as wind generally follows along the contours of the isobar lines, slightly away from high pressure and slightly toward low pressure. It is also the case that isobar lines that are far apart would represent a gentle grade of pressure, while isobars that are found close together would represent a steeper grade of pressure or a steep pressure gradient. In your mind's eye, you should imagine that the air would move slowly down a gentle grade, but quickly down a steep grade, as would water down a hill. Isobars closer together mean higher wind speeds, and this helps us understand what wind speeds we might encounter as these pressure systems move from west to east across the continent. When a weather forecaster talks about fronts, they are generally talking about two air masses that are being driven by air circulation colliding with one another. Fronts are always found relative to low pressure systems and are always characterized by cold fronts following warm fronts. Warm fronts are generally depicted on a weather map with red lines, with half circles pointed east to northeast for the warm front, and blue lines with blue triangles pointed east to southeast for the cold fronts. This makes sense as the leading edge of the warm air from a low pressure system creeps up against cooler air, while the cold air chasing a low pressure system sneaks below from behind, accelerating the warm air rising. Cold fronts being drawn from low pressure is what generally brings on storms. In general, high pressure systems will be characterized by dry air, sunshine, just pleasant weather, while low pressure systems are apt to bring more wind, clouds, rain, and potential storms. If you find yourself in a high pressure system as a sailor, you'll be more subject to the localized effects of the body of water you would be normally sailing. This is based on the idea that water temperature changes seasonally much slower than the land temperature. In June, the water of Lake Michigan will be much cooler than would be the case in August or September. So the localized effect would be high pressure over the lake, especially in the early part of the summer. As the land heats up during the day, during this period, it can be a source of localized low pressure, which would result in wind being drawn from the cool air over the lake toward the land. This is called an offshore breeze and brings winds along the coastline of Lake Michigan up to about 10 to 15 knots in certain cases. So the biggest surprise I received from the weather while sailing was on an evening sail off of Chicago. I had numerous non-sailor friends on board a 40-foot Jeannot Sun Odyssey sailboat. It was a timeshare sailboat. It was a pleasant evening in late June. We were all chatting in the cockpit when the air temperature dropped most suddenly, perhaps by 20 degrees. All but one passenger went below to grab an extra layer of clothing while I maintained course at the helm. I did not see the approaching wall of wind. Perhaps my eyes were not yet trained or accustomed to looking for wind at that point. I didn't see it coming along the water, but when it hit, it was startling. The wind went from 12 to, say, 35 to 40 knots in a blink of an eye, and the sailboat was pushed down on an extreme heel angle on its beam. I immediately bore away to a broad reach to right the sailboat and to allow everyone to gather themselves, though I recall the boat was subsequently heading toward land at a high rate of speed, which was a bit unnerving. We certainly had too much sail up for the conditions at this point, but fortunately, the wind came back down to what seemed relatively to be a modest 15 to 20 knots, and this allowed us to methodically bring in some sail on the furling jib. We basically reefed the furling jib and then worked our way closer to our home port ahead of an oncoming storm generated by a cold front. Weather can easily be taken for granted by a sailor, as we are constantly inundated with information. Understanding what weather a day will bring is so easy to obtain that it becomes almost an afterthought. But for offshore sailors, live-aboard cruisers, or distance racers, understanding how weather works can make a trip more or less safe, comfortable, and efficient. It is a subject that can be boring and taken for granted by most, or can be exciting and part of nature's fascination for a few. Perhaps you got some value out of this weather primer. I want to thank my current subscribers. I really appreciate your support. This is Sailor Eric. Thanks for watching.